both old and new, and Larry and Chris, I always learn something important from you, so it's wonderful to be here with you as well. Let me get oriented here. There. Right. How to regulate AI. Oh, come on. Well, for AI, and here are all the familiar platforms. How many people have used at least one of the ones shown here? Okay, great. There is a range of perceptions of the risks and benefits AI. On the one hand, we have the doomers, people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who focus on the risk, and on the other extreme, we have the techno-optimists, people like Mark Andreessen, who focus on the higher upside potential and abundance of AI. So there's a range of perceptions of the risk of AI. The benefits of AI are unquestionable. We're all familiar with them. Efficiency, better decision-making, better productivity, better innovation and creativity, and all of these industry-specific benefits as well. At the same time, there are very real risks of AI. And this chart from DeepMind categorizes the risks in a range from more knowable on the left on this side to more unknowable on the right side. So there are definitely very significant benefits and risks alike to AI. Now, we do need to be sensitive to the fact that when new technologies, certain new technologies in particular, come to market, they follow a predictable panic cycle, like the one shown here. What types of technologies tend to follow this cycle? Well, those that offer new types of content, multiple functions and applications, broadened availability by reducing costs, mass printing, cameras, recorded sound, motion pictures, all of these produced panics when they were first introduced. And of course, AI fits the model very well. According to this consulting firm, we are somewhere around here in the panic cycle for AI. And indeed, the book, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, just came out from Eliezer Yudkowsky. And I had a chance a couple of weeks ago to ask Daniel Huttenlocher, who is the Dean of Computer Science at MIT, what he thought of this book. I wouldn't quite say he was dismissive, but he did feel that most of the risk of AI comes not from the AI doing bad things on its own, but from bad actors getting their hands on AI. So if history is any indication, generally speaking, the risks that we fear that new technologies pose and the risks that new technologies actually pose are mostly non-overlapping sets. So what would be a good way to regulate AI? One approach that's been suggested is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Nuclear energy is similarly risky as AI has the potential. So would that be a good model for regulating AI? Well, to answer that question, I turned to ChatGPT. What did ChatGPT tell me? Well, the NRC has an outdated regulatory framework that is way behind the new technologies. It has a fee model and financial barriers that discourage companies from being innovative. It's risk averse. There's little incentive for improving designs and many incentives for not improving them, because if there's even one design which is risky, which they have approved, that's very embarrassing for the NRC, isn't it? And of course, as long as the new design is not approved and we don't ever get to enjoy the benefits of that new design, we never know what we're missing. But the costs and risks are very visible, because if even one person dies from an approved bad design, then that's embarrassing for the NRC, and so forth. Interestingly, it's not within the United States, but the last major event, catastrophic event in the nuclear industry was in 2011 in Fukushima, Japan. Many of you are familiar with this, of course. Regulation contributed to that catastrophe in two major ways: a cultural and moral hazard and lack of operator agency. In terms of moral hazard, the regulators knew, the operators knew that positioning the diesel emergency power generators where they could be flooded by a tsunami posed a risk. But it was so complicated and cumbersome to get approval for any change in their layout and design that they chose not to seek approval to it, even though they knew it was a risk factor. Second, insurance was covered and distributed by the Japanese government across all of the nuclear power plants nationwide. So the risk was posed by a single operator, in this case Fukushima, but they knew that the cost of that risk would be distributed among all of the nuclear power plants. So minimizing their risk made them more willing to take other kinds of risks. Also, unlike in the US, in Japan, operators required government approval to vent the primary reactor containment. And they knew that it was going to rupture. And they sought approval, which went up all the way to the Prime Minister's office and was never granted. Well, had they received approval, they could have deliberately ruptured the tank when the wind was blowing out to sea to minimize the number of casualties. Instead, they were subject to rupture whenever it happened, and that meant there was uncontrolled release of radioactive contamination over land. Interestingly, the Prime Minister's office viewed this outcome as a success because they never approved the deliberate rupturing of the plant, and so it wasn't their fault. Clearly a lose-lose. Not surprisingly, under this NRC regulatory regime, the number of U.S. operating nuclear power plants, as Chris mentioned, is actually down 15% since 1990, despite a huge increase in demand for power in the United States in the last 35 years. Well, okay, how about the Federal Aviation Administration and its regulation of drones? Would that be a good model for regulating AI? Well, my first question would be, why aren't drones painting our buildings and picking up trash? They could be doing those things. Well, the reason is because of the panoply of regulations that are keeping us from using drones. The regulations include this long list: well away from airports, that's understandable, up to 400 feet in altitude, but not over people. There has to be a dedicated human operator, one operator per drone, has to be within visual sight of the operator during daylight hours only, and for non-commercial purposes. If you would like an exemption from any of that, you need a waiver. Some 20,000 waivers have been requested, only 4,000 of those have been granted. Okay, what have been outcomes of these regulations? Well, lots of innovations have been disincentivized. The ability for a drone to land safely without power, to recognize airborne objects and avoid them, to extrapolate the position of another airborne object so you can avoid it, to communicate with others. All of these innovations have been disincentivized thanks to these regulations. What has been the outcome? Well, not surprisingly, the top drone manufacturer worldwide is based in China. Shenzhen, China, DJI Technology owns 70 to 80% of the US market. The number 2 provider, Skydio, has only a 4% market share. No one here has even heard of Skydio, have they? And they've abandoned the consumer market. So, what if we had had FAA regulations way back in 1903 when the Wright brothers invented the airplane? Well, maybe, just maybe, coast-to-coast flight jet service would be available in the U.S. starting in January 2027. So what is the right way to regulate a new technology like AI? Well, to motivate that question, I'd like to turn to the First Amendment and ask, what did the founders intend in the First Amendment? So just to refresh your memory, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. What did the founders really intend? Did they really mean no law at all? Or did they mean, well, some laws might be okay? Well, to get some insight into that question, it's helpful to look at the language in the U.S. state constitutions that preceded the creation of the federal Constitution. Here are Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. All of the state constitutions contain substantially the same language. And it's pretty much the same language as we have in the federal Constitution, namely, any citizen may freely speak, write, or publish his sentiments, but it has these extra provisos in them, being responsible for the abuse of that right. No law shall ever be made to restrain the right of speech or the press, but every citizen shall be responsible for the abuse of that liberty. Well, if no law shall ever be made, where does this enforcement of the abuse of that liberty come from? Well, it comes from common law, case law that the states inherited from the UK. So, we don't hear much about case law or common law these days, do we? Here's a best-kept secret. As recently as a century ago, until the Hoover and FDR administrations, common law was the primary source of law in the United States. We've forgotten that. So common law, and I use common law to refer to that common law inherited from Great Britain. Case law is the broader term that applies wherever law is determined by judicial cases rather than by legislation anywhere in the world. Common law already regulates free speech without legislation. The founders knew that, so they literally did not want any legislation at all restricting free speech. Things like defamation, obscenity, and so forth. It's not okay to shout fire in a crowded auditorium. All of these forms of so-called unprotected speech are already regulated by common law, using such elements as the reasonable person standard. What would a reasonable person in this jurisdiction consider the most reasonable outcome of this case? Stare decisis, respecting precedents, so that the law doesn't change willy-nilly every time there's a new case. It's evolved over centuries, so it's had the opportunity to be subject to the test of time, and it's highly nuanced. There are and I'd like to put in a plug for this excellent book by John Hasnas, who is a law professor at Georgetown Law School, called Common Law Liberalism, where I first became aware of this. Common law is fractal-like. By that I mean there's ever finer nuance and granularity between, say, protected speech and unprotected speech here. It has many more dimensions of nuance than a a legislation in a few sentences or even paragraphs can have. Now, one of the challenges with case law is that it is so cumbersome to research all of the previous cases that are relevant to the one at hand and to figure out which one is relevant to your case. Well, AI to the rescue. AI and case and common law mitigate key challenges of each other. AI can be used to go through all of these cases, identify the relevant ones, analyze how current cases are similar or different from the precedents, analyze and identify biases, and recommend resolutions. Similarly, AI can help, case law can help AI, because by training AI on this huge corpus, helps inform AI what is illegal versus harmful or not, and helps AI give more informed advice to us. Incidentally, all of these countries, North Korea, China, Iran, and so forth, claim to support free speech despite legislation that substantially disallows it. So there are two legal traditions in the world broadly, legislation or civil law and common law. And legislation does tend to be more predictable in the short term because clear-cut statutes and regulations eliminate many of the uncertainties of judge and jury decisions. But common law and case law tends to be more predictable in the long term because it's an incremental approach, an evolutionary approach. There's variation in selection. That means evolutionary. And so the massive overnight changes that are so disruptive, like Sarbanes-Oxley or the Affordable Care Act, cannot happen. In summary, the civil law tradition is imposed from the top down. Common law emerges from the bottom up. No single person controls it. It emerges from all of the decisions of court cases across the jurisdiction. It doesn't try to anticipate all future cases and deal with them. It just addresses disputes as they arise. The key point here in civil law is, well, it got a big boost when Napoleon went across the Europe. And it's been inherited worldwide by the colonies of the continental European powers, whereas case and common law has primarily been inherited by the former British colonies and protectorates. And of course, every country uses a mix of both, but when we refer to a common law country, it tends to be one of the countries in the right-hand column. Now, why has legislation so predominated over the last century? Well, there are many forces driving us to legislation. Fear or panic, the need to take immediate action, all of these incentives like signaling virtue and silencing opponents. Agencies are risk averse, and by putting laws in place against new technologies, I minimize the likelihood that I'm going to be embarrassed if one of the technologies I've approved leads to bad results. And it benefits industry incumbents who want barriers to entry. That is very analogous to how zoning laws here in San Francisco benefit existing homeowners and property owners, but of course that makes disincentivizes new building because the zoning makes new building more expensive, and that hurts everybody ultimately. So if you consider where we were a century ago, common law was the primary law in the U.S. The picture looked like this, and because of all those forces, common law is now just a small part of the overall legal framework in the U.S. That's regrettable. Some people think that common law isn't strong enough to deal with new technologies like AI. Well, let me push back on that. This is a famous case in 1994 where this elderly lady was burned by McDonald's coffee that at that time was, I believe, 180 degrees. She prevailed in court and was granted a settlement. And as a result, immediately after that, not just McDonald's, but every fast food chain in the U.S. reduced the temperature of their coffee by 20 degrees. No legislation. No one forced the fast food chains to do that. One common law case alone was sufficient to make that action happen. Broadly similar, in 1998, this single lawsuit, the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, led to all of these outcomes, restrictions on tobacco marketing and advertising and so forth. Now, you may or may not agree with either of these two cases, but the fact is they demonstrate how powerful common law can be. Whether it's a design defect or a need to warn of risks or a manufacturing defect or something is inherently dangerous, so strict liability laws would apply, whether it's a matter of negligence, defamation, agency, or contract law, common law can apply all of these. So, key points. The more innovative an industry is, like AI, the harder it is to predict, and the more case or common law is needed to regulate the industry with the fewest unintended consequences. Precautionary legislation will disallow many benefits, cause the industry to stagnate, as we see with nuclear, and create new risks. As AI increases the rate of technological and societal change, our regulatory mix should be shifting from legislation back to case law, because case law is a form of discovery. It tells us what is reasonable to the people who live in that society. The best legislation is informed by ample case law, because we know that's been proven the test of time, and then we can codify that. Very little of that sort of learning followed by codification is taking place. Many forces are driving the shift from case law to legislation, as we've seen: virtue signaling, empowering federal agencies, cronies seeking barriers to entry, public choice incentives. AI and common law mitigate the challenges of each other. So let's resist the impulse to create new laws and regulations. Instead, let courts first adjudicate harms and injuries, if and when they arise, assign liability, and establish precedents grounded in real life. And let's constantly remind everyone, executives, regulators, educators, journalists, you name it, how case or common law regulates society, the economy, and technologies without stifling them. Thank you.